Your snacking routine can get a little dull. Time for a light and fit remix. Like a crunchy storm of graham cookies, caramel pearls, and dark chocolate, showering down into a smooth, creamy yogurt. Enjoy 3 light and fit remix varieties with craveable flavors and up to 120 calories and 10 grams of protein per 4.5-ounce serving. See remixyogurt.com.
This is Let the Record Show, using common sense. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Good afternoon. This is Let the Record Show. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Chairman Jesse Garcia is out today, but fortunately we have our number one esteemed guest, Eric Levine, the great lawyer, political commentator, and essayist, to join us. Good afternoon, Eric. How are you?
Good to be here, Richard. Thank you.
Well, let's begin by what we call in the Katz and Cosby show every night, breaking news. The breaking news is a day late, but breaking news. Young Mr. Biden, Hunter Biden, the great artist, the great deal maker, the financial wizard, investment counselor, has been indicted by a federal grand jury sitting in the United States District Court for the District of Delaware. Charges are 2 misdemeanor tax evasion and 1 felony charge about falsely reporting on a gun permit when he was a drug addict. And the deal was he would plead out to the misdemeanors. They'd probably give him some sort of probationary sentence and perhaps a fine, who knows. But he doesn't have to plead out on the felony charge, on the false filing. Nothing is said at all about the influence peddling allegations against the Biden family and young Mr. Biden being a facilitator of that, along with his uncle. Nothing is said about failing to register as a foreign agent. It is a felony matter where he does not have to plea. All he has to do is what we call in the business a diversion program. He does some counseling, and then that count will be absolutely dismissed. There will be nothing on the record, on the felony record. So, Eric, to me, this is very, very troubling. And I'll tell you why it's troubling. Troubling to me.
That list is endless.
Right. Why? Well, that's why we have the two of us to go back and forth on this. It's troubling to me because the real issue wasn't that he understated his income and failed to pay taxes on it. The real issue is that he's alleged to be a conduit for all kinds of payoffs, an influencing scam to get access to the Vice President of the United States, who would then return the favor by pitching in on governmental policy impacting the United States of America and its interests. And that was supposedly, according to the lawyer for defense, that was now over. Everything's over. All accounts are settled. It's resolved, asked and answered. No story here. Just a troubled young man. It's over. At the same time, the Justice Department issued a statement, not even a press release, but a statement saying, oh, no, the investigation is continuing. Now, somebody may take some solace in the contention that the investigation is continuing, but I know as a prosecutor and as a general counsel to a legislative body and a Supreme Court justice, that's a way to hedge and protect against giving information to investigative committees in legislative bodies. So you can say it's continuing investigation, therefore the FBI and Justice Department do not have to share information, which means it's a cover. It's nonsense. It's not the truth. This is an administration that's either been lying or fabricating situations since the earliest days when Trump came down the escalator at the Trump building on Fifth Avenue. I'm very troubled by this because the country's future is at risk, and whatever happened to real justice in this country. Eric, your turn.
Yeah, so this is just another example of undermining one of our critical institutions, which is the criminal justice system. And there's only so much abuse that the institutions can take until they get so frayed that they're destroyed. And I think we're on the cusp of that right now. So what we have in the case of Hunter Biden is we've taken clear criminal felony activity and decriminalized it. And then in contrast, as much as I'm loath to say it because I am no Donald Trump fan, Donald Trump, they take as it relates particularly with the Alvin Bragg prosecution in New York, they take what is at worst a civil violation, if there's any violation whatsoever, and turn it into a felony. I mean, this is just a very flagrant example of a two-tiered criminal justice system. I mean, let's remember there was an individual whose name escapes me for the moment who worked in the Trump organization who failed to pay some taxes. It was a substantial sum of money.
His chief financial officer.
His chief financial officer, and certainly needed to be punished. But typically, how those violations were treated, they were treated as civil violations, and someone paid a penalty. They paid the back taxes plus very significant penalties, and then everybody went on the merry way. But in his case, apparently because he was associated with Trump, it became a felony. How many people go to jail now because he's going to go to jail now, or is serving time? He's been convicted of tax evasion and as a felony. So let's remember what Hunter Biden has pled to with these misdemeanors. What's the definition of a misdemeanor? A misdemeanor is any crime that's punishable by less than 1 year in prison. So he will be able to plead out, Richard, as you mentioned, to 2 misdemeanors. He'll little slap on the wrist. He'll serve no time in prison. And these gun charges, which, where is the anti-gun lobby in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party jumping up and down and ranting and raving that this guy needs to go to prison because he has an illegal gun? We need gun control, I thought. And
a drug addict. You remember, he's a self-admitted drug addict. He said so in television interviews. And he said in his book, which he made money on, I don't know why anybody would buy a book about him, because what does he have to say of any consequence? But they buy the book, they read the book, and in there he admits at the time he filled out the application, he was addicted, which worsens the situation that you have a crackhead who's walking around with a gun they shouldn't have. So these are felonies, and they should be charged. But to your point, you're 100% right. In terms of the country, the bigger picture is what role did the big guy, Joe Biden, play in the influence peddling and the bribe taking? Now, I can't say for certain there was bribe taking because I haven't seen any evidence of it, but it certainly stinks to high heaven. On influence peddling.
But we certainly see influence peddling, absolutely positively. And we also know for a fact that Joe Biden lied to the American people when he said he never spoke to his son about his business. There are tapes from the laptop that record statements by Joe Biden, which evidence that he spoke to Hunter about his business. And does anyone believe for a moment that how long is the flight from Washington, D.C. to Beijing? 15 hours, 16 hours? That in a flight when Hunter and Joe are flying together on Air Force Two to China, that he never asks Hunter, what are you doing in China? It's a secret. Joe Biden doesn't know why his son is on a flight from Washington, D.C. to Beijing. He never asks. Who believes that for a minute? Or Burisma in Ukraine. Hunter Biden doesn't speak Ukrainian. He doesn't speak Russian. He knows nothing about the oil industry, and yet he's on the board of directors of Burisma, an utterly corrupt organization. And Joe Biden doesn't know anything about it. He wasn't put there because Joe Biden was vice president at the time. Nobody believes that for a second.
And by the way, Eric, why do you think that Joe Biden, as vice president, went out of his way, and he bragged about it on open television and addresses? Why do you think he was so pleased with himself that he was responsible for blowing away the incumbent attorney general who was investigating Burisma? And he said, if you don't get rid of this gentleman, then these tens of millions of dollars that the United States was pledged to give to Ukraine is going to disappear with me. I'm taking the flight back. He better have been fired by the time I get on the plane. What is that?
Well, it reeks. But here's what it really boils down to. It's atypical for the Department of Justice to explain their rationale behind behind charges they bring against individual citizens. But this is unique. This is different. This is the son of the President of the United States, the son of the then Vice President of the United States. There's a real serious problem of a complete erosion of confidence by the American people in the criminal justice system. And DOJ, and Merrick Garland in particular, who is an utter disgrace, owes the American people an explanation of why these are the only charges that were brought against Hunter Biden. The American people are entitled to an explanation explaining why Joe Biden was not engaged in any influence peddling. We know there's evidence out there. At a minimum, Merrick Garland owes the American people an explanation as to how we ended up where we ended up.
5 years. Why did it take 5 years?
Yeah, if it was a simple, I forgot to pay my taxes or I lied on my taxes, exactly right. It doesn't take 5 years to plead. But to a point you made earlier about Hunter Biden's attorney saying, for as far as we know, it's all over. That's a double-edged sword for them.
I agree.
Because if Congress hauls Hunter Biden in front of a committee, and they should, and they start asking him some very pointed questions, he's going to have a problem pleading the Fifth Amendment because his
own lawyer.
Yeah, his own lawyer has said he's not at risk. The point behind the Fifth Amendment is you can't incriminate yourself. You can't say things that will cause you to go to prison. So if the case is over, as his own lawyer says, the Fifth Amendment can't apply here, and they can compel him to testify. Now, of course, the downside is he'll refuse to testify. They'll bring an action in court, and by the time this is all over, Joe Biden may no longer be president. But we really need answers to this, and it's really very troubling because it goes well beyond Hunter Biden's a nobody. He's a disturbed cretin. But the American people and our institutions matter, and our leaders really need to take into account what the perception is of the American people and address it.
Well, today you're the House Republican. In fact, every day you're the House Republican, and every day I'm the House Democrat. But I tell you,
but you never disagree with me.
Well, that's because I'm trying to do the right thing by this country and by the Democratic Party. This party, my party, has been taken over by an extreme radical faction which dictates the agenda, which closes eyes to the truth and the reality, that has forced it upon this country somebody who has neither the capability nor the moral character to be the leader of the free world, saddled him with a vice president who at best can be described as a major lightweight, and that's being unfair to lightweights. She's not capable of succeeding to the office. And they hired him in a basement during the first campaign, and they're going to figure out angles to hide him away and script him out for next year's campaign. And we are facing the greatest threats this country has had, Eric, in my lifetime. We have internal enemies. We have external enemies. This country is in trouble, and this country has to wake up. We've lost our energy independence. Our national security is at risk. We've lost our allies. Our enemies are rallying against us. This axis of evil of China and Russia and Iran and Venezuela and Cuba is highly activated, and they're moving heaven and earth to marginalize us and to win the long game. And the Chinese, whatever you want to say about the Chinese, is reprehensible.
They're winning.
They're winning, and they play the long game. They play the long game. They have it all plotted out, what they have to do. As you and I are speaking right now, there are stories that not only are you going to have missile bases in Cuba, and not only are you going to have hearing stations in Cuba against the United States, but now moving in military troops or so-called advisors to Cuba. Whatever happened, Eric, that sacred doctrine that protected this hemisphere from foreign incursion called the Monroe Doctrine?
Well, it's been eroded for quite some time, and really the root of it is Cuba. Cuba is at the root of most problems in this hemisphere because its tentacles are in Venezuela, its tentacles are in Nicaragua, its tentacles are in the narco-terrorists in Mexico, and it also invites in, it is going back into 1961, invited in the Soviet Union and the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it now invites in Russia and now invites in China. At the root of this, if we really want to enforce the Monroe Doctrine, and we should, we really have to start thinking long and hard about regime change in Cuba. Because when that happens, the Russians are out of Cuba, the Chinese are out of Cuba, the Cubans are out of Venezuela, Maduro falls, the Cubans are out of Nicaragua, Ortega falls, and the narco-terrorists are there for us to take care of ourselves. So the While Cuba is in our hemisphere, it is the magnet that brings in these other countries, that undermines the Monroe Doctrine and threatens our national security.
And Eric, what's the likelihood of getting this nefarious influence out of Cuba when they're sending in military so-called advisors that are the foreign mercenaries? I mean, how are you going to get them there?
Well, we
just got the signal that we have to take a break. Hold that thought.
It's a brilliant thought.
It's a brilliant thought, and I want you to hold that, Eric. This is Let the Record Show. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is esteemed lawyer, political essayist, and commentator Eric Levine. We'll be back in a moment. Stay tuned.
Let the Record Show is on the air.
Campfire season's back, and that means s'mores. But when you're at home treating yourself, take them over ice with Dunkin' S'mores Cold Brew Concentrate. And suddenly you're always treating yourself. The home with Dunkin' is where you want to be. Click or tap the banner to shop now.
We're shipping Mother's Day gifts with a rapid-fire round of questions. Ready?
Yes, my gift. Can you pack it?
Yep.
Ship it.
Yes.
Guarantee it.
Of course.
Oh, send gift baskets?
For sure.
Protect electronics? Dog-proof it? Return it if they hate it?
Yes, no, and yeah.
Are you the UPS store?
Hey, we have a winner!
Visit theupsstore.com/guarantee for full details. Most locations are independently owned. Product, services, prices, and hours of operation may vary. See Center for details. The UPS Store. Visit a store today.
This is Let the Record Show. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Welcome back. This is Let the Record Show. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Jesse Garcia is out today, but we're fortunate to have Eric Levine, the very esteemed lawyer, political essayist, and commentator, and my good friend, sitting in the studio with me. So you had a brilliant thought at the end of the first segment. Follow up on that, Eric.
I hope I haven't forgotten it. So in 1961, when the Soviets were bringing in nuclear warheads, President Kennedy embargoed Cuba to prevent the Russian ships, Soviet ships, from sailing into Havana and setting up their the missile sites. I think it's time to embargo Cuba again, both naval blockade and an air force blockade, and not allow in the Russians and not allow in the Chinese. Maybe there's a more 21st century way of doing it rather than necessarily sending in vessels and the Air Force. But if that's what's necessary, that's what we should do. We're currently in a position where we have the absolute overwhelming dominant force, military force in the region, where China and Russia will not engage us. But that's not going to be forever if China continues to build a military base there. Remember, in 61, Khrushchev blinked. If Xi and the Chinese Communist Party keep pouring in a military base in Cuba, may get to a point where China doesn't blink. And then we have a real serious problem. We either are forced with allowing China to have a military base less than 100 miles off the Florida coast, or we really are engaged in a shooting war with China in our hemisphere. So now is the time to deal with Cuba. And the way to deal with it is they have to be told Russia has to be out, China has to be out, no listening stations, no military bases, no military hardware from these countries. And if it brings down the Cuban government, all the better. All the better. But it's really time to get at the cancer that is spread throughout this hemisphere, and that's Cuba. And whatever is necessary, and it's not going to require any invasion, and we can choke them off. And unlike Iraq, where we mistakenly thought that they'd be welcoming us, we know the Cubans will be welcoming us. And how many Cubans are in the United States that would love to go back to Cuba and regain their businesses and regain their properties and help bring democracy and entrepreneurship to Cuba? Thousands. And how many Cubans that are currently there that are crying out for freedom, who are currently sitting in prisons? Thousands. This is a recipe for good policy and human rights that could all work together and really secure America's national security in the region.
Well, let me do this as a segue. The problem it seems to me, is a large issue. You're absolutely right. Cuba is a problem. It's always been a problem. It should have been eliminated a long time ago as a problem. But then you have the opportunism of the Chinese, who are much shrewder operators than the Russians and have a better economy, more resources, more human military fodder, better technology. They're at the top of the game and getting better. And they're opportunists, and we're playing the worst game as a matter of foreign policy and national security of appeasement. The Biden administration has just recently shown how weak they are, how they're crying out for any kind of deal with respect to China. They send Blinken over to China. He gets waltzed around. He gets nothing. And he said, we've now established an era, in essence, of good feelings again with China. Everything's fine. We're going to be playing well with them. There's no reason to have any conflict with China. He's wrong. There already is a conflict with China. We just haven't woken up to the fact that they're beating us. They're playing super chess, and we haven't even learned how to set up a checkers board. That's what's going on. Blinken either is a fool or a knave.
Or both.
Or both, and depending on the day. He went there on an apology tour. He got played. He got nothing out of it. Instead of going to China, if he's going to go to China, and it's very good reasons he shouldn't have gone to China, K.T. McFarland has commented on this, said he never should have made the trip. And when you make a trip like that, you should have a clear-eyed agenda of the message you want to deliver and what you have to get back. We got back nothing other than a pat on the behind saying you have an era of good feelings. We got nothing.
It's far worse than that.
And far worse than that. And they sent out a signal, as our foolish president did on the eve of Russia going to Ukraine. A small incursion was acceptable. We're not going to do anything if there's a small incursion. And Putin took that as a green light. Go ahead and invade Ukraine. Now, what did Blinken do? He undermined the whole policy of strategic ambiguity that was the basis of U.S. policy vis-a-vis Red China and Taiwan. Well, we'd never say we're for Chinese Taiwan independence from China, and we kind of winked at saying it's one country. We also made it clear that we wouldn't allow Taiwan to be invaded and taken over by the Chinese. So it was kind of like a double-edged game where you said one thing and then you said another, and you try to reconcile the two things. They really didn't make sense, but everybody knew it was a game of obfuscating the issue so we wouldn't have a challenge and that Taiwan would be left alone. And now, by Blinken making that foolish statement that he doesn't believe in independent Taiwan, he's winked at, just like Biden winked at Russia, saying, you go after Taiwan, maybe it'll be okay. We lose Taiwan, what do we lose? We lose the chip manufacturing component. And with this obsession with electric cars and electric energy and Green New Deal and the loss of energy independence and its obsession with so-called electric everything, and you don't have chips, you tell me how we're going to survive as a modern civilization, Eric.
Well, the fundamental problem with the Biden foreign policy, it's the same fundamental problem there was with the Obama foreign policy. There's no surprise because it's just a bunch of Obama retreads, is that talking is the goal. All you want to do is have a conversation, as opposed to the conversation being a means to an end. The talking itself is an end. So the Biden administration is prepared to make concessions just to have a conversation. So we end up giving away, as you point out, Blinken makes this grand announcement that we do not support Taiwanese independence. Why not? Why not? We should support Taiwanese independence. There are two Chinas. One's an enemy. One's an ally. But if you don't want to make the commitment because of strategic ambiguity, if you don't want to make the commitment that the United States will absolutely commit its troops to defend Taiwan, be ambiguous about it. But don't come out and say, in exchange for how nice you're talking to me, that I'm against Taiwanese independence. That's a concession just for
what?
For in exchange for just having a conversation. Now, remember, what was the primary thing that Blinken went there to get? It was to have military to military talking, to have Secretary Austin to talk to his counterpart in China. And she said no. Unless that was on the table, unless he knew he was going to get that, he never should have gone. There should have been conditions to his going. So what's the other great takeaway for Blinken in his mind that he's getting? That China once again said, yeah, we care about climate change. We care about the climate agenda. We won't do anything about it. We won't commit to stopping manufacturing coal-fired plants. We'll continue to import oil like it's going out of business. We'll continue to build pipelines.
Yeah, they're one of the worst polluters in the world.
They in India and the developing world, everybody but us. So because Blinken and Biden want to continue to engage China on the climate agenda, for which they have absolutely no use and will make no concessions, that's why he goes. And we get nothing. And the interesting thing is, the day after Blinken leaves, that's when we read in the Wall Street Journal that China is now setting up military bases. The real fundamental problem with this administration, again, as it was with the Biden administration, is that all they want to do is what they call a smart power. And to them, smart power is having a conversation and persuading people. You cannot have a conversation and persuade foreign countries of anything unless you have a hammer, unless you have a credible military threat, or unless you make it in someone's interest that they make concessions. They will make no concessions. Talking for the sake of talking is a waste of time. But the Chinese and the Russians and the Iranians, they play on that all the time. They know that
win, and they win all the time. By the way, let's talk about more stupidity from the mouth of the President of the United States. So after Blinken comes back, next day, what does Biden say? He said, well, I don't think the flyover by the balloons was intentional, and that's behind us. That's over. Excuse me? They just did an intelligence raid on the United States, the full breadth and depth of the United States and length of the United States. They over our military bases, over our nuclear bases. They know exactly what's going on, preparing for a real war, and they say that, oh, it's no big deal. Well, Mr. President, let me tell you something. It's a very big deal when you let people who have an agenda to have world dominance and to subvert our institutions and to take over control of the world and replace Pax Americana with Chinese dominance and hegemony. It's a very big deal that they've flown over our territory, and you lied about it, and you said it was no big deal, and you shot it down after they got all the intelligence. And what's that all about? And by the way, is this a coincidence, Eric, that all this appeasement, all this stupidity, what a 12-year-old would know is aggression, and it's related to the influence peddling of the Biden family? I mean, is that just coincidental?
Well,
Am I being too cynical?
No, that's part of the reason why Merrick Garland owns us an explanation. When the connection between Hunter Biden and the Chinese and his influence peddling there, and you have this going on in China, the American people need to know that our president is acting in the interest of the United States and the United States alone, and the American people and the American people alone. Not because he has to worry about protecting himself or protecting his son. I'm not saying that that's absolutely what's going on here, but there's certainly a lot of smoke and a lot of suspicion that
this is enough to have a real investigation.
We need to know that, as a matter of fact, that Hunter Biden, and in particular Joe Biden, is not compromised by China. And we don't know that.
And by the way, let's talk about another scandal involving the great empire of China, which they have no answers. They've never demanded an answer, and they've never gotten an answer, even though all the empirical data, and all of a sudden, scientists who are working in the Wuhan lab, they seem to be jumping out of windows and falling off of buildings again.
They're all
accidents. They've learned from Russia.
They're all accidents. They're all accidents.
They have learned from Russia how to dispose of people who can cause them harm to their narratives and their agenda. Whatever happened about the COVID? Where did it start? Why did it start? Why did you have a military operation doing this kind of crazy testing? Don't tell me it's the interest of humanity to protect against the virus. We got the virus because it leaked. And why did it leak? Because it had sloppy controls. And why was Dr. Fauci and those folks funding that kind of research? Why in God's name is the United States of America funding biological warfare components in a foreign nation with our enemies? I don't get it, Eric.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. But at least be honest with us. Tell us this is going on and then explain to us why. I remember when Senator Cotton, when this all first started, Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas made kind of more than mused, but kind of raised the specter that this really didn't come from bats in an open air market, that we really should be looking at a lab in Wuhan, and that it was accidentally leaked in a military experiment. Remember how he was vilified for that? He was he was crazy. He was
He's
a
conspiracy theorist. What happened in the New York Times? He writes the piece, and the editor who allowed it in lost his job.
But that was a different article. That was for using that was because he made the statement that if there's an insurrection in Washington, D.C., that the cops can't quell, we should consider using the military. That was the one.
Was that the one?
That was the one.
But he also wrote on the other topic. He did write on the other topic. Yes, he made a lot of enemies amongst the powers that be at the New York Times, which is a newspaper that used to
because he takes a contrary view.
Right, it used to be the voice of free thought and independent thinking, even though the historical record belies that. But that's how they postured themselves. That was their narrative, and you let a renegade staff tell the control group that you're not in control, and if we don't like what's being published in the papers in an op-ed piece, which means an op-ed piece gives you a divergent point of view. So if you're supposed to be such a liberal and allow for divergent points of view, where's the liberalism in suppressing free speech? You have to explain it to me. I've missed that one.
I mean, part of the problem was, Donald Trump did not have a grip on what was going on with with COVID. He was completely at sea, and he just turned it over to Fauci. He really should have been running himself, or we should have put other people in charge of it. So there's that failing there as well.
That's another cover-up that has to be investigated. All right, we've got the signal. We're going to be taking a break. This is Let the Record Show. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg with Eric Levine, Esquire, very distinguished attorney, political commentator, and essayist. We'll be back for our next segment in just a moment. Stay with us, please.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This is Let the Record Show. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
This is Let the Record Show, and we're back. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is my good friend, esteemed colleague, and neighbor from across the street who walks across 3rd Avenue to be on the show. Thank you, Eric, for being here.
I'm exhausted.
It's a
long walk.
It's a tough road to hoe, but here you are. So we've been talking about Cuba. We've been talking about China. We've been talking about the influence peddling of the Biden family, allegedly. Let's talk about Iran. Let's talk about Biden's continuing obsession about placating Iran, doing another Iran deal. And this is, by the way, what they're talking about, and they've been doing this secretly, Eric, and they've been using surrogates, intermediaries. They want to do a deal, but they won't call it a deal, and therefore there's not going to have any congressional oversight.
It's an arrangement. It's an arrangement. It's not a deal. Because if it's a deal, it's subject to the Iran Nuclear Review Act, which requires Senate approval. So by calling an arrangement, they kind of get around. Kind of like Obama didn't want to call it a treaty because that requires Senate approval.
Call an Ishkabibble. Yeah. You call an Ishkabibble, and therefore you don't have a treaty that's subject to the Vice President of the United States.
You can't call it an Ishkabibble because that's Yiddish, and that means the Jews had a role in this, and that you can't keep blaming the Jews again. I mean,
so what do we do about Iran? What's the story about Iran, Eric?
Well, what do we do about it? I mean, first, I guess we have to decide what our goal is. If indeed our goal, just to work backwards, if our goal is to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear power, we're going to have to do what's necessary to prevent it from becoming a nuclear power, and that will require military action. The United States, in coordination with Israel, our Arab allies, maybe we can get along a couple of NATO countries, need to take in concert a military strike against Iran's nuclear bases. That is the only way you're going to stop Iran from becoming a nuclear power. The other is regime change, but that's going to require boots on the ground. We don't want to do that. It's not necessary. Now, of course, if we do attack Iran and take out the nuclear sites, the country most at risk for that will be Israel, because it is likely if we do that, rockets are going to be fired out of Lebanon by Hezbollah in the north at Israeli cities, and by Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza at Israeli cities. Thousands of Israeli lives will be potentially lost if we attack Iran. So for that reason, Iran has to understand if we attack their nuclear sites and then they attack Israel in retaliation, we will step up and continue our military action. Iran has to be deterred.
What does that mean, step up? Is that an increase? An
increase.
An increase, does that mean going after Tehran?
Removing their grid, or going after all their military bases. You want to minimize the amount of civilian deaths as much as possible. So you attack their drone sites. We know they're making these drones that they're giving to the Russians to kill the Ukrainians in Ukraine. They're actually building drone manufacturing sites in Russia to manufacture these drones. So after the nuclear site, you attack the drone sites, you attack their navy. Reagan sank half their navy in the 1980s. But you keep ratcheting up. You take out all their military sites until they stop, because the Israelis are going to be potentially absorbing thousands of deaths, tens of thousands of deaths by these rockets because of Hezbollah being in Lebanon and Hamas controlling Gaza. So that's a real problem. But how did we get here? How did we get here? It's all about appeasement.
Appeasement.
So Obama in 2015 came up with this brilliant idea. We're going to shift from being an Israel-centered Middle East policy to an Iranian-centered Middle East policy. And they want a nuclear weapon. So let's pretend that they can have a civilian nuclear weapon, but not a military nuclear weapon. And we reached the JCPOA. And what were we told by Kerry and Obama when they made the deal? It blocks all paths to a nuclear weapon. That was their mantra. Now, of course, that was a lie. It created a legal path to a nuclear weapon.
It's just a question of time.
Yeah.
How soon?
Yeah. Well, in 2030, all restrictions on uranium enrichment were lifted. So it was a legal path to a nuclear weapon. It also allowed them to have a ballistic missile system to deliver the nuclear weapon, and gave them hundreds of billions of dollars in sanctions relief to build their military,
sanction and give money to terrorists,
and to the Revolutionary Republican Guard Corps to fund their terrorist proxies throughout the region. So Biden himself has admitted that was a lie. How do we know that? Because when he was running for president, he decided we wanted to have a quote unquote longer and stronger deal. Well, if you blocked all paths to a nuclear weapon, why do you need a longer and stronger deal? So we know that that's a lie. But what does Biden end up doing? And what's the basis of this longer and stronger deal? He says, we're going to go back to the JCPOA. And then once we're in the JCPOA, we're going to convince the Iranians to make more concessions. Now, the Iranians made very few concessions to make the original deal. Now, all of a sudden, they're going to make more concessions. It's like selling your house for $500,000, and after you get paid, and after the closing, you go to the buyer and you say, you know what? Give me another $500,000. Who's going to do that? You know, the whole thing's crazy. So this is what happens when you have retreads from the Biden administration. Now,
Obama administration.
I'm sorry, from the Obama administration. Yeah, and you adopt the same approach. It's appeasement. How pathetic was the appeasement? The Iranians have attacked. There have been over 80 attacks by Iran directly or Iran proxies against American troops in Syria and Iraq, for which there have been at most 4 retaliations and token at best. And why don't we respond? Because we don't want to alienate the Ayatollah. It's crazy. You attack American troops, the people who attack the American troops need to be punished militarily. Now, who are these allies that were supposed to work with us to get this longer and stronger deal? That was Biden's pitch. We're going to get allies to work with us to get this longer and stronger deal. So who are the only people that benefit from this? So during the Iran most recent negotiations, the Ayatollah refused to allow his negotiators to sit in the same room as Americans. So the Russians worked as the interlocutor between the United States and Iran. Putin was negotiating on behalf of the United States. What could possibly go wrong, right?
I take great solace in his objectivity.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was in place until the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But what happened in the meantime? What happened in the meantime is that the Russians and the Iranians became fast friends and geopolitical allies. Now we know, as we were saying before, that they're manufacturing drones and selling them to the Russians so they can kill Ukrainians. So the Russians benefited from this. Who else benefited from this? The Chinese. As part of the appeasement of Iran, what's the first thing that Biden did? He undermined Saudi Arabia. He undermined the United Arab Emirates. He undermined the Abraham Accords. He did everything he could to push the Saudis and the UAE to China, towards China, away from the United States, to the point where China actually brokered an arrangement between the Saudis and the Iranians. Now, the substance of that deal, whether or not it amounts to anything, it remains to be seen. But that's secondary to the point that China is now have both feet on the ground in the Middle East. They'd never been there before. Now, all of a sudden, Biden has made them players.
What about the withdrawal and the abandonment of the base in Afghanistan?
Well, the catastrophic surrender in Afghanistan is the beginning of all of this. It's difficult to imagine the United States being the world's leading military power in the world ever again after that. But we can, but it's going to take a lot of recovering. But that convinced every nation on earth, friends and enemies alike, that America is an unreliable ally. And the UAE and Saudi Arabia saw that, and they said, if the Americans aren't going to defend themselves in Afghanistan, they're certainly not going to defend us. And also, if they're going to put space between themselves and their most strategic ally in the world, Israel, they're certainly not going to defend us. So if they're not going to protect us from Iran, we're going to have to look to somewhere else for protection. And that's going to either be Russia or, in this case, in particular, China. And that's what they're doing.
It seems to me this will, if you want to be against nuclear proliferation, that this is an open invitation to nuclear proliferation. The only insurance you have against some measure of mutually assured destruction, some sort of deterrence, as I used to say in the old Cold War, when in fact we're in a very hot new Cold War now, is for the Saudis, the United Emirates,
and Turkey, and Turkey, and Egypt,
and Egypt to have nuclear weapons. No?
Oh, absolutely. This is an invitation to nuclear proliferation and a disaster for the world.
Let's take a break. We'll be back for the fourth segment of Let the Record Show in just a few moments. This is Judge Richard Weinberg with esteemed attorney, political commentator, and essayist Eric Levine. We'll be back in just a moment.
This is Let the Record Show. This is Let the Record Show. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
All right, this is Let the Record Show. We're back for the fourth and final segment of this show. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is Eric Levine, esteemed essayist, political commentator, and attorney. So, Eric, let's change our focus a little bit. All of a sudden, you have this new idea, which is actually an old idea, but it's surfacing its ugly head again. And I think it's a very dangerous gambit because just as we have challenges from outside, we have challenges inside. And one of the big challenges is a total lack of understanding, comprehension, experience of the progressive left on the capitalist system and the values that come from capitalism in terms of individual initiative and return and motivating people, having productivity in the economy, which is good for quality of life for everyone. You see this in many manifestations. But the newest gambit is a case that came out of the United States District Court out west and then affirmed by United States Court of Appeals out west, and hopefully we'll get to the Supreme Court where they'll clean up this decision. Fundamentally, it's a simple rule. When they drafted the 16th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which is Woodrow Wilson's amendment to fund the war effort in World War I, for the first time, you had an authorization for an income tax. And since that time, and is recognized by the federal courts, including the Supreme Court of the United States, and by every serious legal and economic commentator, if you didn't realize your capital gain, you didn't pay taxes on that. So let me translate it easily for you. What's an unrealized capital gain? Well, I buy a stock at $10, it goes up to 15, but I don't sell it. That's unrealized. I don't have to pay taxes on it until I sell it, because the stock may go down, it may go up more, but at the time I sell it, that's the price. And so you look at what I paid for it, what I sold at, that's the differential. That's what I'll pay income tax on. That's the deal. That's what the law of unrealized capital gains is about, and it's constitutional. Similarly, you buy a house, and it's a nice suburban neighborhood, and you pay $400,000 for the house, and things go well, and you wake up one day, the house is now worth $600,000. Well, if you're going to tax unrealized capital gains, the day you wake up and some government assessor says it's now worth $600,000, they're going to tax you that differential, that $200,000, even though you never sold it. So you're paying taxes on unrealized income, and how are you going to
You have to
pay
sell.
that?
You have to sell the house.
You have to sell the house to pay the tax. I mean, what is that about? And on the stock issue, why should people invest on that? It makes no sense at all. What say you, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It causes a lot of serious problems, both for taxpayers and the economy, because it's not just your private home. Let's say you buy a painting, or you buy a building for commercial purposes, and now if you have to declare the difference or the capital, the appreciation in value, this gives way too much power to the IRS, who we know we cannot trust. Remember Lois Lerner? Lois Lerner was an IRS employee who decided to take onto herself that she would not give, or was trying to fight giving charitable organizations that were conservative or supporters of Israel. She would not give them their charitable imprimatur. They would not be tax deductible. And then, of course, we have people showing up at Mike Taibbi's house because he's releasing information from Twitter that shows that government has been involved in trying to suppress speech. And who shows up? It's the IRS. So you don't want to be giving the IRS too much power. But what's the power here? So someone declares their building, they own a commercial building in New York. They say, my building's worth $500 million. And the IRS says, no, we think it's worth $750 million. And now and they don't like you politically. They decide it's a fraud. You're cheating on your taxes. You're trying to defraud us out of $250 million of unrealized capital gains that's going to be taxed. And going back to Hunter Biden, and now because you have not declared the proper amount of unrealized gains, we're going to charge you with the felony of tax evasion. We cannot be giving the IRS this kind of power. It would be an unmitigated disaster. I really think at the root of this, it isn't really to raise revenue, because it's only marginally. I'm not sure how much revenue you're going to raise from this. I'm more concerned that it's going to be a tool that will be weaponized to punish political opponents over good faith estimations of what certain properties are worth.
And is this a disincentive to working hard and being productive?
Absolutely.
And accumulating assets for your family?
No, absolutely. You want to get less of something? Tax it. People are not going to take risks and invest in startup companies. People aren't going to invest in businesses. That means fewer jobs. That means less taxes.
Less technological innovation.
Yeah.
Less quality of life.
More people on the dole, which requires more taxes. But there are fewer people paying taxes because there are fewer people working. The whole thing's insane. But it's a way to weaponize the tax system, and it's a way to destroy the economy. It's an unmitigated disaster, and hopefully the Supreme Court, as you point out, will strike it down.
Well, let's talk about another potentially effort by the progressive left to create disharmony in this country and destroy economic value and quality of life. Let's talk about the legislation that was in California and the legislative committee that was just established by the New York State Legislature, controlled by the progressive left in New York State, the Assembly and the Senate, a reparations commission. Can you think of a worse idea to bring unity to this country than saying that based on skin color, people are entitled to reparations in the millions of dollars going back decades and hundreds of years for reparations. You want to talk about a disincentive to working hard. You want to talk about creating resentment between the races and redistribution of wealth. I mean, what are we talking about here with these reparation gambits, Eric?
Well, it's just a redistribution of wealth, and it's a redistribution of wealth based on race. There was recently an article that I read this week written by Shelby Steele of the Hoover Institute over at Stanford University. He's an African-American scholar, conservative thinker, who takes the position, and correctly in my view, that the Great Society established by LBJ, which created affirmative action and a welfare state
for a certain group, right?
was indeed reparations, and that it was a failure because it disincentivized people. It destroyed the black middle class. It also destroyed black families, and that has been a disaster. You know, you look at the big reparations bill that was passed in San Francisco, and now that they're working on it in California, and all of a sudden Governor Newsom is running away from it because he never in his wildest dreams thought anybody would be so crazy as to pass it. So he'd appease the progressives by saying, sure, have your put together your commissions, put together your committees, report back. He never thought they would do it. That's why the one that's being floated in New York City, Governor Hochul should say right now, I will not sign it. I will veto it. So bag it.
Well, that's very interesting because there are two things going on in the great state of New York. One, you have the legislation making it a slate legislative commission, but not to be outdone, the progressive left that controls the New York City Council want to have their own commission. So even if you don't have reparations by state law, New York City is going to go off and say, oh, well, we'll do it and we'll have reparations.
How many people will stay in this? How many taxpayers are going to stay in New York City if that passes?
Of course. It's the most ridiculous. And you create, and all the economic value of your commercial real estate, your residential real estate, your businesses, they'll all die right away within years because people will be fleeing. Everybody will be fleeing. Grab what you can and get out because they will destroy the greatest city in the world because of this absolute lunacy. And they'll do it because nobody will say, as a matter of constitutional law, under the state constitution, that this is beyond the power of the city of New York under the municipal home rule law and state constitutional provisions of municipal home rule law. And you have to worry about the packed New York Court of Appeals where you want to pray that they'll give you an honest constitutional decision, which is that this is unconstitutional by a local government doing it. But they already blew out any kind of independent judiciary from the Court of Appeals because they got rid of the one chief judge who they didn't like. And then you have the second nominee who they didn't like, and they put in the person they liked. Well, we got the sign. The trapdoor is about to open for us, Eric. This has been Let the Record Show with my esteemed guest, Eric Levine, commentator, lawyer, essayist. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and we look forward to talking again with you next week. God bless you, and God bless America.
This is Let the Record Show.